Okay, thank you very much for coming to hear us. Sheila and I are going to, this is more of a show and tell than a lecture. We haven't really exactly planned what we're going to tell. We know what we're going to show. We're going to show you what we've done, which is running currently in Venice. And the theme of the Biennale was Common Ground, as it is now our school-wide theme. And we're going to show you how we try to respond to an interesting letter of invitation that we got from David Chipperfield when he announced that he was going to be when he was announced as the artistic director of the Venice Biennale. He wrote to a number of people, I think a small number of people, something like 10 or 20 people, to ask them would they help him develop this concept of common ground, and we said we would, and then we found ourselves moved from being invited to show at the exhibition to being part of what he called a specials category, meaning we also were expected to actually make something. And so we now found ourselves, having said yes to an invitation, we found ourselves committed to an installation, with, of course, no funding, which is the story of our lives. This exhibition is going to be some kind of story of our lives, and we're going to try and tell it to you here. The reason I put that one in is because I just love the way David took over the Vaporettos in Venice to put the common ground symbol on it and his poster on it. This is the Vaporetto to the Arsenale, line number 1. And when we brought our stuff to Venice, we had our own little day where Nolan Transport, in its red oxide tent, was, an Irish Vaporetto. There were a couple of things we had in mind that we felt we had to represent if we were going to do any work at all, even before we knew what we were going to make for the Biennale under the theme of common ground. And one of them is something to do with our studio culture and the way we work together in the office and the way we work with our colleagues in the office. So we knew that it was going to be something that kind of came out of this idea of our studio. We also knew that it was going to be something to do with experience. This is a book that we refer to all of the time, and I'm sure that if any of you have ever come across this, we would be recommending this book to you to read. Published in 1959 by Rasmussen. But just for its title, I think we wanted it to be not only something you would look at, but something that you would experience. And also, just by way of introduction, I think we also felt that it was a chance, perhaps not to show a project, but a chance to explore something kind of parallel pursuit in our own work to do with poetics and architecture.
But I suppose the significance of showing the poetry so early up is that we also felt that the common ground, which we enjoy in our work, goes way beyond common ground with architects and with place, but it also, maybe being located in a society like Ireland, which is insular and small, so that we feel a lot of connection with poets and musicians and people who are working in other cultural pursuits which aren't directly related to making place. So from the beginning we thought our common ground, coming from Ireland, would have to include something beyond physical. And
we thought it would have something to do with form, with the idea that we, in our practice as architects, we feel that architects need to kind of assume responsibility for form. That is to say that they need to understand the significance of the form that they're making in their work. And we use this term in our work of resultant form. That is to say that we are able, at least to ourselves, to explain to ourselves why it is our buildings look the way they look. Okay, that was the background. Now we're going to talk to you about Venice. And this is part of our own backstory, which we must bring with us as we find ourselves in Venice. Because Sheila and I studied architecture here. You'll find our names on the ceiling, surprisingly far back this room. We met each other in the first year studio in the School of Architecture. And happily for our future lives, we didn't team up too soon. But we did leave college escaped from college to go to Italy and on a tour, from which we have not yet returned in a way, I think. But it was exactly at that moment in 1976 that Aldo Rossi's book, The Architecture of the City, was published for the first time in English. And so suddenly everybody was reading this book in the year that we graduated. And one of the first illustrations in The Architecture of the City is this capriccio from Canaletto, where he takes all of the architectures of Palladio and assumes them into Venice, as if you could come to Venice with all your favorite projects, pile them all on top of each other, make them into a picture, and it would stand there as a piece of work. However Canaletto intended it, it still seems true about how Venice is understood today in relation to the Biennale.
So we headed off in 76, as John says, to look at things we had been shown as students, but had discovered for ourselves, mostly Palladio. And we did this tour of Palladio villas, partly on buses and trains, partly on bicycles, and found many of them, like this one, were abandoned and empty. And we were really surprised to find, because our history lectures had suggested that history was then and we're now. What we really enjoyed about that was finding that Palladio was doing the same thing we were doing. He was making buildings and places and spaces, and we felt an amazing sense of connection. And the images you're seeing are part of, last year, the year before, a couple of years ago, there was an exhibition in the Royal Academy about Palladio, and these images, they asked us to put something into it, and we put these slides from our trip.
And funnily enough about that Royal Academy show is that we only had slides from our trips and our various trips to the Palladio villas. But since we went, a certain amount of time has passed, which we might not have noticed, since we are the same age as we were when we went. But all of our slides are of the Palladio houses before they were restored. And the people in the Royal Academy thought that our slides had archive value, because you can't see the villas like that anymore. You know? Like we had picnics in them and things like that.
But this is a really important picture, I think, because in 1980, which was the first year we went to the Biennale, which I think maybe was the first year the Biennale was brought back in, the Architecture Biennale is as old as the art one. We were there when Aldo Rossi's Teatro del Mondo sailed down the Grand Canal and got moored here at the end of the beside the cemetery at the end of the Dogana. And this is a bit like the Capriccio, the idea that a building can appear and disappear, can move in and out, and can represent something so potent but is temporary, was somehow really striking. And
we didn't know Aldo Rossi then. He was a hero. We'd read his books. But we saw him hopping out of the water taxi. We'd never been in a water taxi either. We saw him hopping out and into his teatro. And then we went to dinner in a restaurant that somebody told us about called La Condamonti in a garden. And we sat down and Aldo Rossi was at the next table to us eating, meaning that Aldo Rossi also eats. And we were so suddenly aware that if you go to Venice, things come on to you. So when we came back, we moved back to Dublin, I should say. We had been living in London. We moved back to Dublin and together with a group of friends thought we should do something about this near miss. We never met Aldo Rossi. But why didn't we set up an architecture gallery in Dublin, paint it blue, and then write to Rossi and say, we have a gallery, all we need is your work. And we did, and Sheila wrote the introduction to this little blue book, and we published a book, and we held an Aldo Rossi exhibition in the little gallery that we set up called the Blue Studio. And it was a great moment for us to do that. This is the poster from that exhibition. I'm amazed to see that this exhibition ran for 2 weeks. It took us about 3 years to organize it. Okay. Our first project that we ever built together was designed in 1989 and built in 1990 in the Netherlands. So our first building was abroad, and it was for a temporary exhibition pavilion. This time it lasted 6 weeks in the Netherlands, which was in the north of Friesland. We were in a Nordic exhibition called 11 Cities, 11 Nations. And the timing of that was such that the Irish Museum Von Nart was opening in 1991, and they wanted to have some kind of sense of what was going on around the world of artists and artist collaboration work. So we got selected to be in the front room of the Emma with our Dutch pavilion when it opened So our first building ever was on, extremely public view, and we were absolutely enchanted with this opportunity. This is the opening of Emma on Saturday that it opened. One of the worst days of our life, because we hadn't realised that everybody hated our pavilion, including our closest friends, who were walking away from us with their eyes to the ground, saying, "You must be so embarrassed."
But the night
Don't worry, it'll be over soon.
But this photograph, I think, was taken the night before the Friday night, which was the night of the special opening for the artists whose work has been exhibited in the opening of IMA, many of them from all over the world, and they all loved it, and they all thought it was very beautiful. And it actually, very importantly, is a collaboration with the painters. So it's not just a piece of architecture, it's built around 11 particular paintings. So it was a kind of interesting and useful experience to find that sometimes you do things which you think are right and true, and that you have to sort of survive public.
We still have it. If ever you find yourselves going through any of our archives, we still have the Sunday Independent that came out the next day. It said, "Take this shite house out of the Royal Hospital for me." What kind of art would come on show with its arse hanging out of its trousers? These are quotes from prominent politicians at the time, calling it a pigsty and cowshed. They were probably right about that. We learned one thing about artists too. We worked a lot with artists, but we were trying to interpret Brian Maguire's pictures to bring in the shadow, to bring in the isolation, to bring in the kind of mood of his pictures into our installation. He lives in a world of loneliness and shadow. So we put some shadows around. Then Brian said, in relation to collaboration, he said, "All I want is a white wall." So we had to paint the walls white. And then he said, "And if I wanted a shadow in my painting, I'd have painted it." So then we had to light his painting separately from the exhibition, so there were no shadows in his pictures. Okay. I think it could be that John Parker is in this room. Is he? Maybe he's shy. But his work is in this slide. In 1991, we were invited, UCD, where we were now teaching, was invited to go to the Venice Biennale in an exhibition called 40 Schools of Architecture. So UCD was one of the 40 schools represented, and we were the curators of that show, and we took contemporary student work, which was John Parker, Tom DePuer, Martin Henschel, Simon Walker, who actually did a lot of the work in building this large wheelbarrow. Lots of the drawings of this Margaret Stevenson, Kathy Kern, lots of the drawings of the students of that time, many of whom are teaching now in this school. And there's one spooky thing about this picture, which is that they're in the Arsenale, between the columns of the Arsenale in the bays that are given to the schools of architecture. But now, this year, at this moment, our exhibition is here in the next bay. So 20 years later, we're back in the same spot, with a new generation of UCD luminaries who hang out a lot in cafe society.
Well, actually, I don't think this is very hard work. This is a lunch break on a very hard working day in 38 degrees, where the only current student is Don, because Johnny and Brian and Don and Gary.
Escapees. We'll come back to that.
Pavilion.
Then we went again to Venice in 2004. In the meantime, we also got married and went to Venice and had many, many, many trips to Venice in which we didn't figure in the Biennales, but I think we've been to every Biennale since we saw Rossi eating his dinner. However, in 2004 we were selected to represent Ireland with the project that we did in Letterfrack, which was, to our misery, an unfinished and frustratingly unfinished project. So we jumped at the chance to show it in this 2004 Biennale, so that in our minds we could finish the project.
Well, I think the other thing that is common to both this year and 2004 is that we felt when we were invited to exhibit in the Biennale that it's very hard to make an exhibition of architecture, because other art forms for the most part are exhibiting the actual work, like painting or sculpture. You're looking at the painting, the sculpture, but when you're asked to exhibit architecture, you're usually representing you're usually showing representations like photographs or drawings. So in 2004 there was a kind of double thing. We decided we would make a piece of architecture, make an installation, and it was a way of completing the project which was incomplete, completing it in a different way obviously because it's built within an exhibition pavilion, but we wanted to make the exhibition out of something that was a built structure or a series of built structures with space, so that it would actually be architecture as well as represent architecture, but that it would have the double thing of having to represent the unfinished
building. And we made a book of that exhibition, and the idea of the book was that within the kind of larger story of the architecture of our furniture college at Liverpool lay another story, which is the history, the horrible history of it as a repressive institution from which we were trying to release it. So we had this idea for the book that you could put a book inside of the book. You know the way people read books inside other books that they don't want people to know what they're reading. So we made our catalogue like a book in a book. And we made our exhibition with different levels of detail, which still relates to the way we've done this year's one, I think, that you see the large-scale structure and then you pay attention to what we were calling memory boxes at that point.
Well, I think that we found it really interesting, and so did a lot of other people, and there was a lot of kind of response to that idea of the structure and the boxes and the story in the boxes. So we have continued to think about exhibitions and architecture in that way. So as John says, this year's installation it still uses similar kind of themes or ways of thinking about how to describe work.
This photograph was at the time on the front cover of the culture section of the New York Times. All of our American friends rang us up and said, "You're a half page in the New York Times. Success is around the corner." Where it stayed. We were exhausted by this work, I tell you, because you get these invitations, like we did to our first project, the installation in the Netherlands. It seems to be the pattern of our lives that we get these coaxing invitations, and then people say, "By the way, there isn't any money. Could you raise the money?" Anyway, we've done this a number of times. So our photographer, Dennis Gilbert, was there taking pictures, and we were just sitting down having a rest. This year's colleagues will know it's hot, it's mosquito-laden. And we sat down, and Dennis Gilbert said, "Oh, you look like a picture." He took our picture, and we thought, "Okay, that's it, we're finished with Venice now forever." Until Alice Clancy appeared again this year and said, "Sit down for a minute and I'll take your picture." Donnie Johnson's could tell you a lot of stories about how this happened. But before we come back to this year, let us take another tiny episode in Venice, which is courtesy of Hugh Campbell and Natalie Redick, who were curators of the Irish Pavilion in 2008, who had this provocative theme about lives of spaces, which comes from movies, asking architects to make a kind of film about architecture. We didn't have a building finished to make a film of. The building we were interested in was not yet finished, so we tried to represent it as if it was, in a way, the elements of the film to do with space, light, time, movement. And as we were making this little doll's house, with a kind of house inside, we were just making it in the office out of cardboard, and we realised that if we took the hole on one side of the box and the hole on the other side of the box, and kind of pulled them together like this, you could look in two directions at once, which you will see is still something that's on our minds. When you looked in two directions at once into the Lives of Spaces box, you got this image of the light changing inside a 1 to 15 scale model. Kind of a day in the life of the courtyard of Angeloris in Derry. And the project was under construction at that time. So weirdly, when Derry was finished and the light was coming in and the music was playing, it sort of reminded us of Venice, rather than the other way around.
I mean, the significance of this is also that kind of thinking about that sort of space, and even about making it in that armature, as we call it, is really, in some ways, very important in terms of starting point for this year's Venice, which is about this theme of vessel, which is the title of this talk, where we have in recent years become really interested in the idea of the interior, what it's like to be on the inside of something, and the relationship between that and the outside, and the idea that buildings or spaces have this vessel-like quality, and that the inside is not always an exact mirror of the outside, but that there's a kind of carving out, and there's a kind of thickness or a difference between the inside and the outside, which Gayloris, where the only facade of this building really is in the centre. And I mean, it goes back in our work to the film centre, but maybe Gayloris being totally new building has more of that sense.
And so it goes on in what we're doing now. And now, I mean, at this very moment we're working on a university master plan in Budapest, trying to connect courtyards together to make embodied space or vessels out of the courts and make punctures between them, so that working your way across the courtyards of the old city of Budapest, you can connect the spaces of currently isolated vessels together, and by making new buildings and old buildings, we can sort of make a tapestry or some sort of connecting urban plan. And the architecture of Budapest turns out to be very interesting. It's all courtyard house based. And we went to see this magnificent house, which is called a House of Seven Courts. This is the plan of it here. And as you pass through seven courtyards in a row. And we were really interested in this idea of kind of barreling through the block. Budapest had reminded us of one of our favourite images of all time, which is Gordon and Matt Clark's attack on the urban blocks beside the construction of the Pompidou Centre in Paris. And Piano and Rogers are doing the bulwark. They're going to demolish the block in front of the bulwark. But just as that was about to happen, Matt Clark attacked it with this sort of spherical, conical encroachment. And I think, independent of his work as an artist, it gives you this idea that you can have the fixed fabric of the city and you can eat it. And then you get the intervention, but you need the constancy in order to make the change. So this
you also get the connection, you get the sense of things connecting through a depth.
Surprising, which is what we're trying to do in Budapest. This is Brian Barber's model of trying to imagine the hollowed out spaces, trying to imagine these vessels, these courtyards in Budapest as if they are spaces in the air. And this is Edin Djuricevic's model of the opposite, of trying to imagine these spaces, these connected spaces, as if they were solids. Anyway, this is what we're doing. We're trying to turn these courtyards into thriving kind of inhabited space. These are the things that are on our mind while we're trying to think about Venice. Our project in London, the LSE, which I spoke about here last year, is a kind of reverse of that, where the form is it's like if you cast something out of the vessel and left it in as a mold, which is how bricks are made, that the form of the building itself is like a molded form made out of brick. So we thought we would take the bricks of the LSE project with us to Venice, because Venice is built out of brick, and we would sort of reintroduce the clay of the clay brick tradition, the clay brick reality, material sense of our form project in London into the world of Venice.
And we had this exhibition here last year, the brick exhibition, and in a way that was a kind of dry run for a part of what we were going to do in Venice, which I think we were already planning the Venice exhibition, but we hadn't fully resolved what we were doing. So there's always this kind of dialogue going on between the form and the sort of solidity, as in that sketch, or the detail of how bricks are made and the relationship between brick and timber.
This was my first sketch for the LSE, but the interesting thing is that you go to a brick that, in a way, the first sketch, which is for the whole building, ends up being quite like the form of the kind of boxes that bricks are made out of, and you realise that you're thinking at the scale of 1-to-1, or the scale of casting is to do with how the city is formed as well as how elements are formed. So you would have seen these shoeboxes here in the exhibition of last year, and then we brought them, and here they are back in Venice. What we are trying to do with this thing is to explore the brick conditions of the Arsenale building in Venice, and to bring this form-making idea into that brickness. We had found an excerpt from Dante's Inferno, which talks about the times that the ships were being made in the Arsenale, and describing the brick architecture of the Corderia, and Dante talking about boats and ships and caulking vessels and vessels that can no longer sail because they need to be maintained. So we thought we should bring some kind of feeling of this back into the place where these ships were made. And we tried to use the kind of brick, this is our artist's drawing of the brick assembly, but we tried to sort of translate that into this fantasy about building a brick structure that would stand like a brick kiln or something in between the brick columns of the Arsenale, except you can't build it in brick because that's take too long, so we tried to think about building it differently. This was our first sketch that we sent to David Chipperfield and his colleague Kieran Long as to what our intervention, our special installation intervention might be like. And we called it Shrine. Again, you have to be careful with language when you speak to particularly English people, I think. There was a very negative reaction. Shrine of what?
Of religion. It's not really a religion, is it?
If
it's a shrine, it must be a religion. Anyhow, but they actually really liked the idea and the form, they just didn't like that it's called shrine.
So we had told them we thought very deeply, and we wrote them a message and said, what happens if we promise never to use the word shrine again? Because what we're really doing is a vessel. And they said, oh, vessel. Right. So I think that's true. What happened? Brian was there, it's a witness. This is Brian Barber's drawing of trying to translate, my sketch there into a sort of a more geometrical, something that could be measured. And trying to imagine, at that time we were going to put a sleeve down its throat, which we might yet do, of a sort of reflective sleeve, like a gullet, that would bring the light down like a channel. That's what that little fragment in the middle of all that assembly is. And we knew we would have to build it horizontally because it's meant to be brick. So it would be constructed on horizontal layers in the same way that you build a form out of brick by keeping to courses.
I mean, I think the other thing is that we're talking about it isn't just an object, but there was always an idea that it was a space that you move through, and that actually where it is located in the Corderia building is about moving into a constricted space and having release upwards and then coming out to another space. And there was a sense about what we weren't exactly sure what it was made of, but the horizontal thing John's talking about, when we made the Scary House in 2004, that was clearly made out of a frame structure which related to boat building. But while this has some similarities in a way to the form of that, it's a completely different kind of structure because it's actually about carving away rather than framing up, or about building up and gradually the form receding and being formed out of these horizontal layers.
So we built a 1 to 10 model of it. I should say that Brian built a 1 to 10 model out of it in a workshop of our joiners, subcontractors who are building windows for us in Longford, Gem Joinery. And we built it with the material that we're making the windows from in the LSE, Jatoba. And in the course of that we realised how complex it is to make this thing, and also, even at 1 to 10, how heavy this thing is going to be. It turned out at that time, I think it might have been 27 tons. 27 tons is quite heavy, and it's also quite heavy to put on the floor of a historical building, which we later found out could only support 8. So now not only do we have the name wrong, but we had the weight wrong. But we got fascinated by the space-making possibility of building it in thick timber, like a thicket of timber.
Well, we started with it being Irish oak, I think. We thought it has to be Irish oak, it's an Irish thing. Then it became chestnut, and we went through a number of types of wood. And as John said, it was very dense, but that was too heavy. And it's kind of interesting when you start working with people who are going to make something, you realise you have to change what you're doing. So it's gradually evolved from being, it thinned out, thicker thinned, so the spacing of these things changed, which turned out to be much better because it was brick proportion of the gaps came in, but also the wood got lighter. The wood we thought we'd never use, which is Sitka spruce, but in fact we're very happy that we used Sitka spruce. Then that came about because the people building it said you couldn't do it the other way. But
well, two things in this drawing. One is the location. We were given this amazing location early on in the approach to the Arsenale. So more or less once you've been through the mental washing machine of the cleansing process of Thomas Struth's photographs and the washing machine of Norman Foster's installation, you then emerged into the kind of form show proper, and we were the first object that you would see in a very nice relationship with a set of shrines that were on a Mexican kind of religious way. So we really enjoyed that location. And when we were trying to draw, this whole story is going to be told, but when we were trying to draw it, out of our freehand drawings into our computer drawings, we realized we were hatching all the time. And then Sheila and I have spent some time in Rome looking at this knowledge plan in Rome and realizing that all the vessels of all the interiors of all the city of Rome are, if you like, scooped out of hatch. So we thought, why don't we actually use hatching as our, the cross-hatching as our construction technique.
We actually were in Rome when the invitation came from David, and whenever we go to Rome, I always make photocopies of the Nolly plan and bring it with me, and then every day do little coloured pencil lines of exactly where you're walking. Because what's amazing is that pretty well everything that's drawn on this map, drawn in 17 whatever, is exactly the same and is still there, and you can walk through these spaces that are both public and more private. So it was really in our minds that sense, not just of the hatching, but of the carved out space and the spatial experience of walking through the city. So somehow those two things merged and we started thinking of the building we were making, the structure was a kind of bridge.
Christmas time we spent a week staying just here by the Pantheon, and several days we walked over here to this spot just there, which is the San Carlo at Quattro Fontana, to look again and again at Borromini's church. But the idea of it as a vessel, as a kind of as a hollowed out space, as an architecture in its own entirety. And we got very interested in the configuration of this building, which is a whole other talk in itself. Suffice to say here that this front of it was completed after Borromini's death, and the chapel, the church of it, was the first project Borromini built in Rome. So it's amazing kind of how this building captures its whole life story. But we were thinking about it as a form, and if this is the husk and this is the form, then the next thing is just how it reminded us of how Alto cast his vases out of forms of tree trunk, which just was a thought that hadn't really crossed our minds before. What's the form that comes out of the holy form? And this thought became the thought that we made our Venice project out of. There was a form inside. It's a form inside a form.
I think that while all this was going on, we were kind of forming an overall view of this exhibition, because it wasn't just about making the structure, it was also about kind of, I suppose, ruminating on this concept of vessel and section. It came about, I suppose there were a number of themes. One was the sections. So on the right we have a series of models all made at 1 to 15 sections through buildings that we admire, which represent this characteristic of vessel. And then in these boxes where we're busy cleaning, putting stuff, is in the first one is the Nolly plan and the Borromini and Alto and some other object type things. So there are 4 kind of sections in this box, in this cabinet, which describe different aspects of either buildings or maps or places or sketches or sculpture, which represent or describe the kind of interest that we have, which is our common ground.
This covered up book here with these Japanese spoons, they're heaped on top of a picture of Ronchon. Ronchon is the hidden key in the whole picture. The whole exhibition is about Ronchon. This is the pencil sharpener that Giancarlo De Carlo gave me as a going away present one day, and this is a kind of slide viewer that I always keep on my desk for looking at close print. And I thought if I put it over the plan of Borromini, people could come up to the exhibition and look in it and see the Borromini plan. But what was amazing is that the lighting in the exhibition meant that there's a focal point of the hot spot of light right on the Borromini plan, which a lot of people were worried would really burn a hole in our original drawing plan. We had to test that temperature for some time. Sheila has a huge interest in polishing glass.
Which turned out was shared by Dom. So we spent a lot of time doing glass polishing and cleaning and preparing.
And there's the polished glass sitting there.
Very, very clean, yes. I think Johnny did a lot of
This is the first model that we ever made in our office, ever. And it's interestingly enough, it's a thing inside a box. It just happens to be the first model we ever made in our practice. The first project we ever built is a steel seat that was for the Lighthouse Cinema in 1988. We have the steel seat now in the office. But we painted it in red oxide, and that turned out to be a life sentence. We wrote to Seamus Heaney because we had used his poem, this Animals Say poem, as a kind of inspiration for our Glaxman gallery. And he very kindly sent a manuscript of the poem that we could put in on the theme of vessel into our exhibition. So with Heaney in there, we wrote to Tim Robinson thinking about the wormhole and he has written about as a square root of Arran, as a kind of a hollow in the form of the island of Arran. And he wrote a special little essay for us about the geometry of Arran. And then we got this, borrowed this photograph of Dorothy Cross sacrificing herself, or offering herself within the space of the pool of Arran. And then we put all of these things about the form of Glucksman, Robinson's book, Heaney's poem, in a box which we call Poetics.
And then we've done some collaborations with other artists, and this is Janet Mullarney, who's a fantastic sculptor who's Irish but lives in Italy, who works a lot on wood, but recently has been working in casting of aluminium. And this sculpture that she made, which is of a set of human shoulders, she actually turns out later, or after we contact her, she thinks of it as a vessel. And we thought of this as being a kind of vessel which is in some way a description about the sort of the human condition, about the strength in the body as a vessel. And she sent us the sculpture, but also this sketch and her description about, it's about some work she's been doing in India. And one of the other people we were putting in our sort of table of affinities, as we call it, is Peter Salter, who's an architect whose work we greatly admire. And somehow we found then a really strong connection between the form. This drawing, Peter, he made this drawing for us for the exhibition, which is a kind of description of some of his work, but it's sort of a speculation really. It's not an exact description of a place.
This is his response to our question about vessel, what he's calling a yurt, where it is, Peter has this beautiful way of drawing figures into his architecture, so we put him in the exhibition beside Janet Mullarney, so they would get to know each other, by friction. And if in the next picture you'll see that, you can hardly see, but there's a reclining figure by Janet Mullarney, a little cast figure, which is exactly like the reclining figures in Peter's drawings. So people who didn't know each other got to know each other by being trapped in the same box.
And then that thing about box and vessel and inside, outside, and a kind of psychological sense about space and object is also, we feel, very strongly embodied in the work of Mary Foley, who's a sculptor who lives in Cork now. And we asked her to make a contribution, and she contributed these 4 boxes, which were boxes made in response to the poetry of Rilke. And we incorporated them, which are very beautiful, because Mary's work is a combination of found and made things, so the boxes are found, but the nails hammered in are her, and then she makes these little porcelain castings. And there's a kind of mystery that nobody quite knows what's going on. She has an incredible refined sensibility about how to make things and how to put together existing things and things she's made. So we took these 4 boxes and we incorporated them into a part of our exhibition.
So the vessel is the emblem of the show, but the content is much more to do with this backstory. We just wanted to show you our plan. Because this is the way you come in. This is on item 5 was Luigi Snozzi's story about Monte Carrasso. In the middle and projected onto this wall there was a fantastic exhibition about Mexican sacred way with shrines being made along. Here there was a beautiful exhibition of Thomas Struth's photographs, a lot of them to do with punctures into buildings, which seemed to suit very well our setting. And then on the axis we made this interruption that people had to climb through, passage through a space, and then on passage through they emerged into our world, if you like, having been baptized into it by the light coming down the funnel. So this photograph kind of describes the territory of the field of our exhibition, with brick floors, bits of the LSE, various pieces that you'll get to know in a moment.
Well, I think the thing about we did have this word field of affinities, and it seems important that architects recognise that we are working in a world of culture that goes way beyond just the art and science of building. And I think we were really keen to collect together a combination of people without whom we wouldn't have, sometimes when things are crap in Ireland and it's really hard to keep working here, there's a lack of support and money and culture. To know that these other people are working at a really high level in the fields they're working in kind of gives you the sense to try and work as well as they do. So it's partly that, and partly it actually is a conversation about the work. So we were trying to make the way the exhibition is set out also a conversation both visually, and as you move around you can see a turn and see something else. So the plan is really about those connections. And I think there's a tendency, because the festival is very big, to think that's what the exhibition is about.
I should say, yeah, about the mouth of it, the maw, and the ghost who isn't present here, is that a lot of this space was designed for a performance by Martin Hayes to come and play his fiddle in. And there's going to be an audience like you in this space here, and Martin was going to be sitting here. And we've talked for a long time about doing a space for Martin Hayes to play his fiddle in. On the time it came, because of the timing of the Biennale, he had a recording contract that he was not able to escape from. But neither will he be able to fully escape from his promise to play in our structure. So maybe in round 2 you might see him actually do it. This was the approach. This is a little tour through Alice Clancy's elegant photographs of our installation. This is this moment where the world divides. You choose to climb up the steps. You can't climb up these steps because they're not properly steps. The window and the opening is too narrow, so we had to help Kurt Foster back out of that space before he broke his neck. You pass through into the narrow slot, you lose your sense of direction, and then you emerge into red oxide land, brick land, Marifoley land. And the throat of the funnel is over your head with the light pouring down to change you. Changed, you emerge and arrive in the world of these pieces that we have discussed. So that's the Luigi Snozzi film in the background, that's the Mexican film in the foreground. This is the first 1 to 10 model, which we oriented all of our pieces at the same orientation, so they're like offspring of each other, like constellations in the sky or something. But to talk about what's in the box for the moment. People walk along like this and they look into what's happening in the box, and as they're looking at things in the box, they're also looking at things on the wall opposite. So you look in the box, these are some of my notebooks, Sheila's sketching the Pantheon, first sketches for the vessel, and an idea here that we could make it in oak, and that maybe Joseph Walsh, who's a master craftsman working in Cork, could actually make one out of solid oak. And we developed this thought over some time with Joseph, and in the end, he did. You'll see his piece. Here's his piece at the end of the table. The first of a number of shrines that we're making with Joseph Walsh, where he's kind of carving out the space to suit our aspirations. Common ground? So, yeah, I mean, maybe Aldo Rossi appeared in the beginning of this presentation, and this amazing monument by Rossi, this is a cover of Casabella from 1963 or something. Yeah. Where he built this monument to partisans in, I'm not sure where. And this is a section through this monument which he built, which we were always really struck by, that you come in through this, up these steps under this amazing kind of way into a space where there's a window that allows you to look out over the town. And so we took his height. We took his height of 10 meters as our common ground, and then we put everything that we were studying up on that rostrum. So if you see here, this is Rossi's monument opposite in Rossi in the box. Then you see we've taken that table height, that common ground of 10 meters for every space that we're studying. All of these being presented as vessels. There might be loads, I think there's loads.
Keep going. Yeah, I mean, this one you can see, the really interesting thing is, because these models were made by Brian and Johnny and Don, mainly, I think. But as they were making the models, they discovered, for example, the Rossi, the first one with that datum, said the horizontal strip window in Rossi is exactly in the same location as the horizontal strip window in Caesar's Market Canabasis Church. And we kept finding kind of chain reactions, connections between all these buildings that we admired.
When we wrote to Todd Williams and Billy Chen to ask them to contribute a vessel, and we got this sketch from them of their open-air discussion room, and they didn't know that we were making them beside Alan Rossi, whose work they don't know so well. But it's a complete inversion of the Rossi project. But it turns out, you see, that John Haydock brought Rossi to America, and John Haydock taught Todd Williams. So there's a kind of lineage that even the people who carry this lineage don't always know about, that they are, if you like, using the same language as each other. All of it coming from the windows and the laterette that come in other pictures.
So, I mean, all of those models are made at 1:50 in cardboard and using white to show the way the light comes in on the section, and then painted red on the cut section. Another artist or craftsman whose work we've really admired for years is Liam Flynn, who makes these really beautiful wooden bowls out of solid lumps of either oak or fog oak or different kinds of wood, which he carves. He starts with a block of wood and carves the outside, and then gradually carves the inside. And they have a kind of complex rim, which you can just see when you look in. And John phoned up one day and said, we'd like to put something of yours, can we put a bowl in our exhibition? And he said he was delighted, and then we thought, everything else has been cut in half, so...
I asked him, would it be a sacrilege if we cut one of your vessels, if we sliced it? And I asked him in the morning, and I got an email back from him in the afternoon. He didn't reply to my question, he just sent me an email in the afternoon with this picture of it. He went out and he sliced the vessel. I just think, ask a craftsman and he will give you an answer. He didn't write a paper on it, he just sliced it. And what's incredible, and you haven't done this before, what's incredible is you see the artistry of his work. That it's like he's thinking about his work in section. So remember, this is being taken from the outside on a lathe and on the inside with a chisel. So his chisel knows where the lathe is, you know what I mean? And he makes an absolutely perfect cross-section.
But you can see him better when it gets painted red.
We asked him, could he paint it red? He said, no, you can't paint it red, but send me the paint and I'll paint it red. Which is okay. So we put him on the slice, on the slicing machine with everybody else. So it goes, Liam Flint, who is a vessel, sliced vessel, our vessel is sliced in one axis. Alvarato's experimental house, which has a fire lighting in the middle of it, flipped over into Leveran's, this flower shop, who are obviously close relations with each other. Peter Salter's pavilion, which is very, very intricately, carefully made to reflect his current work in the 4 houses he's building in London. He's going to come in the spring now to tell you about those 4 houses he's building. The chapel at La Tourette, which has, instead of Alto's fire, has a raised altar, and the window, this window keeps popping up, the monk's window that is in every other project, sees as Marco de Canaveses, without Gary, Caesar could not have made this work. When Gary won the prize for Bilbao, the Iberian Prize for Architecture, Gary's acceptance speech was, why did you give it to me? You should have given it to Caesar. That, Al Ross's Cornell Monument, Todd Williams, Billy Chan's open air discussion, and back to our vessel. So there's a kind of a slice. This is a shelf that we could go on with forever.
We need to move.
So fly.
Okay, so this the brick exhibition is in this too, but it's been exhibited in the school, so we don't need to really talk about it except to show that it's there, and maybe we'll pause for a moment when we come to the drawings of the Nottons. So this, and then it's in again. So you see in this photograph that we extended a number of drawings. So the whole of that back wall was covered in these drawings of the brick specials and all the bricks of the London School of Economics, with the floor made in the same brick. And then you saw this through and in relation to the other objects, and with John chatting to Ray Ryan from Pittsburgh. And here are the team who made this project happen. And the 4 guys, well, 3 particularly, Johnny and Brian and Don, spent 4 weeks building it in Venice in the heat, and Laura, who made all of the drawings and worked really to pull the whole thing together, and Gary, who spent a week with them and was a visiting builder. I think, John, you might have to, do you have to
just
time
keep going.
lapse? Sort of just to finish with, this is our Judgment Gallery in Cork, and the reason for showing it is that inside that window that you can see the dancer on, last year was installed this project we made with the same man who John talked about, Joseph Walsh, who made a solid oak vessel. And we designed this desk, a kind of a home office desk unit which hangs on the wall and which opens and closes, which Joseph has made at an amazing level of refinement of craftsmanship. And we've been thinking a lot about the idea of a desk as a kind of box, and that the desk folds down as a lever top, and then there are all these little boxes and places to keep things. So you can kind of have your whole world of work in it, and then you can close it up or open it down. And it has, it starts, so this just shows the sequence of all the different things that it does as you move it around. So you can have it in different conditions depending on the way you're working or the kind of things that you're storing in the desk, and then that's it again, open with all of the collection of stuff in it. So this was in our minds a lot when we were doing that other thing, but also a bit after we got the letter from David Chipfield, we got another letter from Williams and Chen, and their installation for Venice was that they had 35 wooden boxes, of which this is one, made up by a friend of theirs who's a craftsman, and they sent these boxes to people all over the world, 35 people obviously in different places, a lot of architects, some artists, some other colleagues of different sorts, and they stenciled people's names on their names here. And they wrote a letter inviting people to fill the box with objects which inspired them and which were important to them in the making of their work, but which in themselves were not an architectural project. So they were in a way looking for kind of background or backstory from people, which would be in these boxes, and then they were going to install them all in a little building in the Giardini as their Venice. So their common ground was to invite 35 people to send in this description of their work. So it was quite difficult. Well, we found it very difficult, partly because we were doing the other thing, which was big and it was all about affinities and objects, and we were putting a lot of the things that mattered to us already into our own exhibition. So actually, we were on our holidays, I started just thinking about what might be the idea of this box, and came up with the idea that somehow the box might have a kind of layered aspect to it. That would start, we'd put something in the bottom of the box, and then we would put a grid inside that and place objects in it which were important, either for physical reasons of their form or their reference to architecture or to buildings, or to do with experiences. So we started collecting things, and this is the Nolly plan with the coloured pencil lines on it. So, well, we had a clean copy of the Nolly plan in our own installation. I really wanted to put this, which is actually the one that was all photocopied. It has all the lines of coloured pencil showing the routes you take to the city.
This is what it's like living with Sheila. We go for a walk in Rome, and Sheila comes home and she traces the path of every walk we've been on. I tell you, if you go on holidays with Sheila, she goes for a swim in the sea, and she comes back and draws a map of all the boats she swam around. This is what she's like.
Okay, the swimming map actually didn't make it into the box in the end. It was under consideration, but it didn't go in. So then there's a lot of stuff that we were collecting and thinking about. So, and some of them were watercolours that I had made over time of objects and things that were important. Because sometimes you can't put all the things in, you can just put representations. Or both of our fathers are engineers, and I think that's quite important to our way we work as architects. And this, you can already see, is a drawing. I found this pile of drawings a few years ago, which were drawings my father made when he was a first-year student in UCD engineering, which are amazing pencil and ink projections. This is called interpenetration, about how two forms interpenetrate each other. And they're just, you know, I don't know how he did them, but they're amazing drawings. First-year engineering student, and they just have incredible clarity. So, what I began to make was this layering of that the back of the box would have this stuff like drawings by my father and John's father and other objects, and then we put a grid in front which has objects actually some of them are made by our sons as well, so it does in a way become a bit of a personal life story, and then things that we found, or I got quite interested in the idea of things other people gave us which matter to us. So these sketches are about the grid, and there's a chair which ends up in the box which keeps appearing in the sketches, which is a wooden Greek chair we were given by an old man we met on an island. It was a chair from his taverna, which had his initials painted on it, and he gave it to us because we really liked the chair, and we took it home, and we have it now in Connemara, and this chair somehow comes into the box. And a lot lot of the thing about the chair is probably just about life and use and time. This is a detail focus in on part of the box that has a chair showing the layers of paint peeling, which is also, I suppose, about time and experience, that these things in use change. Actually, what's interesting is the chair has gone all rusty in places now, because although it spent, I don't know how many years on a Greek island, it spent the last 10 years in Connemara, so it's getting rained on in a different way. So gradually, I suppose this is the final way the box is, which is that's a little section there, which has drawings and images on the back, a grid in the middle with objects, and then the chair is in the lid, so the box closes over with the chair. When you look at it, it's open with the box. So the base of the box is my father's drawings, drawn by John's father, some other stuff of ours, things about landscape. Then we got made a maple grid, which has 27 squares, which originally started to be about 27 years of our practice, but it kind of changed. And then I made little subdivisions because some of the objects were too small, we couldn't fit them in. So these very tiny things, which were some things done with matchboxes by one of our sons, and a piece of jewellery made by his girlfriend, which is very beautiful. And gradually the things built up. The thing about things people gave us is that the tie of Jim Sterling's, which he gave John around the time he finished working for Archie, Jim's wife gave it to John after Jim died, or some little wooden stamps that a friend of mine gave me in Venezuela. So and they sort of, as objects, they're important, but they also kind of tell a story. So it eventually, this thing got filled up, and you can see here before we were finishing it in the office, the chairs bolted into the lid, and then all these other objects kind of float in front of the background drawings. And this is packing it up for Venice, and this is Todd and Billy opening their 35 boxes outside the building that they're going to install it in. That's the building. And then there's some photographs of the installation in the space. So they just took everybody's box and placed them. And it's really interesting because Morphosis, although it's not to be an architectural project, Morphosis can't do anything that isn't an architectural project. So their box, instead of a box, turns into an incredibly complex section of gold, which is very elaborate. And another person made a really beautiful thing about taking a branch of a tree and building it into the box. And so you get this amazing kind of common ground with 35 different people from all over the world exhibited in this space. Including our chair. And this one is actually really lovely. Elias Torres just took the box and cut it up and put lots of hinges and joints and turned it into a house. But when you unfold it all, it turns back into the box that we sent them, which is actually really clever. So I think that is the end of the talk of our experience in Venice, except that John, you might be going to do, you've got the time lapse in your mind.
Yes, I can just get it online.
There's a 40-second time lapse, which represents 4 very long weeks of work by Johnny and John.
These people, these graduates and students and young architects worked so hard to make this thing. Night and day, without stopping, except for the occasional break in that elegant canteen you saw them in, and raised the tower right through the roof to its full height of 9 meters, sometimes without using proper scaffolding.